salary at Kuhn Loeb had been $500,000, equal to well over $10 million in today's dollars. He relinquished that for a Federal Reserve position that paid $12,000. Warburg knew it would be far more profitable to control America's interest rates and make the stock market rise or fall at will. Congressman Charles Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous aviator, helped lead the fight against the Federal Reserve Act. In 1913, he declared on the floor of the House,
"This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation will be legalized. The money power overawes the legislative and executive forces of the nation. I have seen these forces exerted during the different stages of this bill. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation. If the trust can get a period of inflation, they figure they can unload stocks on the people at high prices during the excitement, and then bring on a panic and buy them back at low prices. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed."
The day of reckoning, Lindbergh predicted, came with Black Thursday and the great crash of 1929. The crash wiped out millions of small investors, but not the money trust. Warburg, Rockefeller, Morgan, Bernard Baruch, and other top insiders had already exited the market. Although friendly biographers attribute their perfectly timed departure to their fiscal wisdom, fiscal foreknowledge of the Federal Reserve policy they controlled rigged the game in their favor. The Federal Reserve nearly doubled the discount rate between January and August of 1929. The bankers also pressured stocks down by heavily selling the market short and massively calling loans on investors who had borrowed to invest in stocks, forcing the borrowers to sell stock to repay the loans. These tactics converged, generating a snowballing panic that would bring the entire country into the greatest financial depression since the Civil War. Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency from 1920 to 1931, had this to say.
"It was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here, so that they might emerge as rulers of us all."
Afterwards, the money trust returned to the market, exactly as Congressman Lindbergh predicted. They bought up stocks that once sold for $10 per share at $1 per share, widening their ownership of corporate America.
Well, the Fed affects prices by devaluing the dollar. So every time you devalue the dollar by a little bit more, it costs that much more to purchase a good. When I talk to people who are struggling with the value of their money, and they talk about the need for a minimum wage to be higher, for instance, because they say, well, we've got to make more. We're not making a living wage. What they never seem to connect is the fact that part of the reason they don't make a living wage is because the value of what they're being paid continues to drop.
It's not what the young people are doing wrong, it's what's been done to them. When great-grandpa came here in 1900, there was no income tax back then. People today are spending about half their income on taxation. It's true when you take your federal income tax, state income tax, real estate tax, Social Security tax, sales tax, excise tax, utility tax, you are paying about half your income in taxation. Now, doesn't it make sense? If you pay half your income to taxes, you'll need 2 jobs to maintain the same standard of living that 1 job used to pay for.
So if you understand who these people are, and you understand what their mission is and how they think and what their ideology is, then most of the mysteries of the modern world, of how come we're getting into this mess, or why are we doing this and so forth, they become easy to answer. If you don't understand that little twist of that word really runs America, it's not the voters, then all of these things remain a mystery to you.
Who's the guy that deregulated the Glass-Steagall Act and the banking acts that were put together in 1933, following the crash of '29, because of what Wall Street and the banks did? Robert Rubin, under Clinton. Where was he from? Goldman Sachs. Who's the head of the European Central Bank? Mario Draghi. Where's he from? No. European director of Goldman Sachs. Who's the fellow that's running the Bank of England? Mark Carney? Oh yeah, him. Where's he from? Goldman Sachs.
And it's the bankers, it's the heads of international corporations, it's the existing power structure. And people say, well, if we don't have government, we won't be protected from the evils of rich people. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. When you have a government, what you have done is put an army of enforcers at their disposal.
The United States is run like a major corporation.
The 20th century in the United States has been one of centralization, as it has been around the world. It's partly due to the rise of technology, and it's partly due to the consolidation of these banking powers.
So who really runs America? The global money paradigm really runs America, but the people, if they have consensus, and I think we can give several examples, the global food revolution is certainly one example where you see people from Occupy Wall Street and people from the Tea Party, people from all different segments of society coming together to say we want clean food. And you notice that this is maybe one of our most successful endeavors. So I like to think the truth is that the people in consensus run America, but if we don't do it and we don't spend time doing that, then the global money paradigm runs America like they run everywhere else.
So it's killing everybody. It's costing everybody to live more, and everyone's earning less. The numbers don't lie. The numbers are there for everybody to look at. Median household income is below 1999 levels. Kids with college degrees, half of them have jobs that only require a high school education. They're robbing us right in front of our eyes, and you have slime-ball politicians and prostitutes on these business shows that keep the lie going. Too big to fail.
What's going to kill the dollar is when people realize that it's a system of exploitation that funds oppression, that funds wars, that funds the police state, that funds all of the regulations that are keeping you from being able to conduct your business the way that's going to make you happy, and they abandon it. That's what's going to kill the dollar.
Hey, the power's in our hands. Now that we know what the game is they're loaning our own money at interest and putting us in debt so far that this country will crash. Bad austerity will come to this country. This is right off the IMF's, World Bank's plans to go in and wreck countries. The chickens have come home to roost. But don't call for the end of the Fed unless you have a pretty clear idea, some kind of consensus of what we're going to have in its place.
The Federal Reserve itself does not have absolute autonomy to act as it wants within the global system. It acts according to the international body of the Bank for International Settlements. The Federal Reserve, by default, inherits some of that secrecy, if you will. And we'll never know what happens, what really goes on inside the Bank for International Settlements, much less the Fed.
What can be done about it? Well, not a whole lot unless Congress gets off their hands and does something about it.
The most significant mechanism for forcing the US dollar on the American people and on the world as the world reserve currency is through requiring it for payments of taxation. And you can't pay your taxes even if you're engaging in barter. You're supposed to be reporting all of that. You're supposed to be paying your taxes in US dollars. So there's an inherent demand for that. There are certain things you can only use dollars for, and therefore it becomes the dominant currency. And there are some things that you really can't avoid it for. You know, if you want to park on the street here, you know, you got to put coins in the meter. If you, are doing something in your life that exposes you to a tax liability, that means you've given the government an excuse to steal from you that is generally accepted by their enforcers. Yes, I understand there's no way around it, but there's a very simple way that you can opt out of the system by doing as much as your economic transactions as possible in non-dollar denominated currencies, either gold, silver, or what's really exciting now that's opening things up is cryptocurrency, Bitcoin being just the first of many.
In January 1919, 2 months after the armistice, the delegates of the victorious powers arrived in Paris for the peace conference to draw up the terms to be offered to the defeated countries. In all, the representatives of 27 nations attended that conference.
Who did Wilson appoint to head the American delegation to the peace conference? Paul Warburg, who he'd also named vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. How could Warburg, a recent immigrant, be the only person qualified for this critical position? Who did Wilson bring to Paris as chief economic advisor? Bernard Baruch, to whom he made all those campaign pledges. As always, the president was under the watchful eye of Edward Mandell House, the banker's frontman. Wilson did not invite any leading Democratic Party members to Paris. Not one senator or congressman accompanied him. Only the bankers and their entourage. At this conference, Wilson presented his famous 14 points. The most important of them called for establishing the League of Nations. Many people think he invented the League, but it originated with House and the bankers. Ray Stannard Baker, Wilson's official biographer, said,
"Practically nothing, not a single idea in the covenant of the League was original with the president."
Charles Seymour, House's official biographer, said, "Wilson approved the House draft almost in its entirety, and his own rewriting of it was practically confined to phraseology." What were the bankers seeking in the League? World government. The Paris Conference produced the Versailles Treaty, which officially established the League of Nations. Ironically, though Wilson had proposed the League, the United States did not join. The U.S. Constitution stipulated no president could single-handedly make a treaty. The Senate had to ratify it. The Senate rejected the Versailles Treaty. Americans had helped win the war, but saw no reason to join an organization that might infringe on their sovereignty. When news of the Senate vote reached Paris, the bankers reacted swiftly. They held a series of meetings and resolved to form a new organization in the United States. Its purpose would be to change the American opinion so the nation would accept world government. In 1921, that organization was incorporated in New York City as the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council's original roster reveals that most members were bankers or lawyers affiliated with J.P. Morgan and Company. For example, Morgan's personal attorney, John W. Davis, was the CFR's founding president. Morgan's attorney, Paul Cravath, was founding vice president. Morgan's partner, Russell Leffingwell, was first chairman. Since this looked unsuitable for a Foreign Affairs Association, the Council diversified its roster by adding professors. However, these came from universities receiving large grants from the Morgan interests. The professors, carefully screened, could be relied on to attend Council meetings, then return to the universities and preach the glories of global government. By the late 1920s, the Rockefellers had brought their people into the Council. David Rockefeller was the CFR's chairman for many years and is still honorary chairman in 2014. One way the Council influences government policy is through publications, including many books and especially its periodical Foreign Affairs, a virtual instruction manual for U.S. foreign policymakers. Time magazine has called it the most influential journal in print.
They do have a publication which my husband subscribes to. We've been reading it for a number of years because of the jaw-dropping insight that it provides into what they're thinking. And they don't mince words in there. They will come right out and say that we need to have this form of control, we need to do this form of manipulation, we need to convince people of these certain sets of beliefs. And you read this, and it's written in a very highfalutin, erudite, academic kind of a style. So you have to get past that to really get to the gist and the meat of what's being said.
The CFR's most important means of controlling policy is supplying cabinet-level and sub-cabinet-level personnel to the government. What policies have the Council created? Let's take examples from after World War II. The League of Nations had effectively collapsed with the war's onset. Its successor was the United Nations, a bolder step toward world government. The UN began with a group of CFR members in the State Department. Working under Secretary of State Cordell Hull, they called themselves the Informal Agenda Group. The group drew up the original plan for the UN, then consulted 3 attorneys, all CFR members, who declared the scheme constitutional. Subsequently, they met with President Roosevelt, who approved the plan and publicly announced it the same day. After that, FDR made establishing the UN his top priority for post-war planning. just as the League of Nations had been to Wilson. At the UN's founding